live, and there's a countdown on that. So we're not actually live until, but they will start promptly at 10, it looks like.
Okay. And we will plan to go live and let the attendees in here in a couple minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just let me know when everybody's in and we're ready.
And then just a reminder,
Recording in
Amy's-
progress.
Amy is joining us today, and that is the only ex officio member who is.
Apparently we got a train.
Is that coming for me?
No, me.
The grain train is loading this morning, so.
Oh, is it? Cool.
It's
Grain
very
is moving.
multimodal.
Yeah, the harvest
That's
is
right.
about,
We need to orchestrate a fairy foghorn, a fairy horn going off in the background. Okay, are we gonna go ahead and open it up for the attendees now so we can?
I've got 1 minute to 10. Do you want me to open it now?
Yeah, you might as well. So we get everybody loaded in here and we can start.
Okay.
Charlie, thank you.
And TVW will go live in 25 seconds.
All right.
We've started.
Mr. Chair?
Good morning. Welcome to the Transportation Commission hearing on the proposed changes to the ferry fares. Today is Tuesday, August 10th, 2021. My name is Roy Jennings and I have the honor of serving to the commission as its chair. This morning, we will be briefed on the proposal put forth by the commission in June. Following that, we will take public testimony on the proposal. We will end the discussion by the commissioners taking action. This meeting is being streamed live on TVW. It is being recorded and the recording will be posted on our website after the meeting. Commissioners, during presentation, if you have comments or questions, please turn your video feed on when you would like to speak. Members of the public wishing to testify, if you have already signed up via the commission's webpage, you do not need to do anything further. We will soon be calling on you and we will enable your video and mic. If you have not signed up to testify before this hearing and would like to do so, please check on the question and answer button found at the bottom of your screen. Enter your name, your position, pro and con, and the city you live in. Once we have completed testimony from those who sign up ahead of the hearing, we will shift to those who signed up during the hearing, and we'll do our best to get everybody in the time allotted. So now let's do some quick introductions. Commissioners, Debbie?
Good morning, Debbie Young, Commissioner from San Juan County, serving as Vice Chair.
Kelly?
Good morning, Kelly Fukai, Commissioner from Spokane County.
Jerry?
good morning, Jerry Litt from Grant County.
Esther?
Hi, Hester Cerebrin. Oh, can you hear me? Sorry, I froze. Hester Cerebrin, she, her pronouns, King County Commissioner.
And Shiv?
Commissioner Shiv Batra from King County.
And from the department, Amy? Can you introduce yourself?
Jim could introduce himself too.
Okay. I missed him.
It's all right. Good morning, Jim Restucci, Commissioner from Yakima County.
Amy?
She has not joined us yet, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Now we're going to introduce the staff. Rima?
Good morning, Rima Griffith, Executive Director from Olympia, Washington.
Carl?
Good morning, Carl C., Deputy Director from here in Olympia, Washington.
Tamara?
Good morning, Tamara Jones, Senior Policy Analyst, she, her pronouns, calling in from Tacoma.
Aaron?
Aaron Halbert, Financial Analyst in Thurston County.
And running the meeting behind the scene, Bobby and Doreen. So let's get started. First up is the overview of the 21-23 Ferry Fair proposal. We will be hearing from Ray Deerdorf, Carl, and Aaron, I believe, to walk us through the proposal. Which one's taking it?
I'll kick us off, Chair.
Okay.
Sure, I'll kick us off and then pass it off to Ray for us. Real quick, just wanted to walk through a quick agenda for the presentation. As Commissioner Jennings referenced, Ray will be joining us, and in doing so, will be taking us through the recap of the fair proposal and financial information. Then Aaron will walk you through input from the online public forum that took place in early June. And finally, I will recap the Commission's selection of the fair proposal that you selected in June, as well as feedback made since making that selection. With that, I will pass off to Ray. At the same time, I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with Ray since we know this is his last hearing, and I'll let Commissioner Jennings speak to that maybe more a little later. But as a colleague, it's been a pleasure to learn and work with you, Ray. So we will miss you and appreciate the chance to have had that time to be a colleague. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Carl. I'm Ray Deerdorf, the Senior Planning Manager for Washington State Ferries. And a little bit of a reminder of where we've come from in this process. First, we, back in the late part of last year up through the spring of this year, we were engaged in development of the fair proposal with two major inputs. The inputs from our Ferry Advisory Committee on tariff and other public outreach, and then the legislative budget. How much money did the legislature's budget require us to generate from fairs in the 21-23 biennium? Then we gathered initial public review of two alternatives, and these comments and preferences aided the Commission in identifying a specific single proposal for public review. And finally, we're in the current period where we've had public outreach on a single proposal, and we're now at the fair adoption hearing. So we'll move to the next slide, please. This is a little more detail on the steps of the process. You can see there's a number of different steps involving a number of different activities with presentations of the commissions, working with the Ferry Advisory Committee on tariff, form filing with the the code revisor, public meetings, and we're now towards the end at the adoption hearing, and we've got a couple more steps afterwards, which I'll touch on later. We can move on to the next slide, please. So the 2.5% fare increase options were based upon the March 2021 ferry ridership and fare revenue forecasts. The legislature identified a fare revenue target that was consistent with raising fares 2.5% across the board in both October of 2020, October of 2021 and October of 2022. that would generate an additional 9.2 million in fair revenue for operations above and beyond what we would have generated if we had not raised fares at all. The capital surcharges, which are now like 50 cents per fare, would remain unchanged in this budget. We'll move on to the next slide. So these next slides are going to delve into the variances between forecasts. We touched on this a little bit at my presentation to the commission last month. And in this COVID environment, it's been very challenging to forecast. The biggest concern that we had was that because our forecasts tend to swing on a quarterly basis during this COVID period based on rapidly changing conditions, we were concerned that the legislature would have based their budget on the March forecast. If the March forecasts were kind of a high swing, then we could be caught short with the proposal generating enough revenue. Fortunately, the good news is that the June forecast came in a little higher than March's, at least for the 21-23 biennium. And here you can see just to the right of the dotted vertical line that in FY22, we had forecasted in March 19.3 million riders, but in June, we forecasted 20. And then in FY23, we had forecasted in March 22.6 million, but the June forecasts came in a little bit higher at 22.8. So that's the good news. And then if we move on to the next slide, what that translates into is a slightly higher fare revenue forecast for June than March for both FY22 and FY23. And you might note that the fare revenue forecasts, fares are forecasted to kind of bounce back faster than ridership, just due to the fact that we're forecasting a very slow growth in the less expensive fares like commuters and in particular passenger commuters. While this is all good news, remember that this is a time of great uncertainty in forecasting due to the number of factors. On a more global scale, rates of vaccination and new variants, and on a more local level, our ability, Washington State Ferry's ability to provide service with our ongoing vessel availability and crewing availability issues. Should like to point out that we're actually not running quite the full service we thought we would be running when we did the June forecast. For instance, we're not doing a second vessel at Port Townsend this summer, and we're have had to reduce some of our Sunday service on the Vashon Island route compared to what we thought we would be doing in June. So everything is still kind of in a little bit of a flux. But moving on to the next slide, here's an illustration of how forecasts have bounced around in response to rapidly changing conditions. These are fare revenues, and you can see the fiscal years across the bottom from 2019 all the way over to the right. The far right is like 2031, but we'll focus on the 2022-23 fiscal years for purposes of this conversation. We do our forecasts every quarter, and the legislature typically bases its budget on either the March forecast in a budget setting year or the February forecast in the supplemental in between budget year. And you can see our fare revenue forecasts in prior to COVID that we did in February of 2020 is the dotted blue line that's higher. You can see we did take a pretty big dip. Our forecasts that we did in June of 20 and September of 20 and November of 20 forecasted a rebound, which which did not happen as rapidly as anybody thought. So we did take this into account for our March forecast, which is the red line, which is the lower one. Since then, we've bounced back a little bit in June, which is good, but you can see where it's still flex. That's the green line. So we've bounced back a little bit above the March forecast there. So I just wanted to give you this as sort of background information on kind of where we are. I'm going to now, we would go to the next slide, take us back to the FAIR proposal. In June, Washington State Ferries presented the 2 FAIR scenarios to the commission with the comments heard about each. And Carl will go into this, I believe, in a little more detail in a bit. But the commission selected alternative 1 as the proposal to take forward. That was the 2.5% fare increase for both passengers and vehicles in October of 2021 and October of 2022. Moving on to the next slide, there was another, a more, I would characterize it as a minor item that is part of the FAIR proposal. And that was a change in the van pool definition to match the changes in state law from the 2021 legislative session that had the minimum van pool usage requirement change from 5 people in a van to 3. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over, I believe it's to Aaron, who will continue.
Thanks, Ray. So if we could go to the next slide really quick. Thank you. So at the end of May, we launched the 2021 Ferry Fair Online Public Input Forum, which was open through June 10th. The forum was open to anyone in the public to vote on the proposed van pool definition change, as well as the opportunity to provide any written comments. During this time, about 1,100 participants voted and nearly 700 written comments were submitted. Overall, there was greater support for alternative 1 than for alternative 2. On the next slide, we can see the actual breakouts of the voting results. So alternative 1 received 420 votes in support versus alternative 2's 236 votes. And then similarly, alternative 1 received alternative 1 received 475 votes in opposition versus alternative 2's 636 votes. And then neutral votes were about even between the 2 alternatives. The key takeaway here is that there was greater support as well as less opposition for alternative 1 than alternative 2. And then at the bottom of the table, we can also see the voting results for the van pool definition change. And again, there was about an even split between those in support, opposition, and those that were neutral. On the next slide, we can see a bit of context around those who actually participated in the survey. About 32% of voters stated that they were weekly riders and 22% monthly riders. And so this means that most participants of the survey were, occasional riders, which makes sense considering, the rise in teleworking over the last year and a half. And then on the next slide, we can then see the most common modes of travel among participants. And here we can see that, about 80% of the participants were vehicle riders. Next slide, please. So as I said a little bit earlier, we received nearly 700 written comments, 689 to be exact, actually. And there was, a wide array of responses. So it was hard to summarize all of them, but these were some of the most common words that came up. And then on the next slide, we can see a few examples of the comments we actually did receive. Some comments indicated the rising cost of riding the ferry, the support for ride sharing and walk-on traffic. Others brought up concerns for multi-ferry users and proposed additional discounts for those frequent users, since they tend to face the greatest burden on fare increases. And then we also saw comments voicing the importance of offering viable public transportation connections and options at terminals. So from here, I'm actually going to pass it back over to Carl, who's going to go over which alternative was eventually selected by the commission and why that selection was made.
Thank you, Aaron. As Aaron referenced and as Ray walked through, on June 15th, at the commission meeting, the commission selected alternative 1, following a recap of fare alternatives, feedback from members of the Ferry Advisory Committee on Tariffs, and review of public online forum results. As Ray detailed earlier, alternative 1 again implements a 2.5% rate increase for both vehicles and passenger fares in October 2021 and October 2022. In selecting alternative 1, the commission, you as commissioners, identified the following reasons from at that meeting. 1, a stronger overall public support indicated in online forum voting, as Aaron detailed here today. And second, vehicle use that has been and continues to be less of a choice and more of a requirement during the pandemic, and the continuing recovery as people seek to abide by public health guidelines, and with the reduced transit service that remains today. So with that in mind, as a matter of fairness and interest, there was an interest in sharing the burden of the fare increase between vehicle users of the ferry boats and passengers in light of those external conditions causing an increase in vehicle traffic, at least for the time being. Next slide. Following the identification of alternative 1 as the option, of course, the alternative was filed with for additional public comment, and during that time, between June 15th, I apologize, through July 30th, we received additional comment on alternative 1 that I wanted to share. Excuse me, sorry. Share with you today. During this period of time between about the mid-June to July 30th, we received feedback that was totaled about 120 comments, ranging in topic from general opposition to any fare increase, to service issues, to topics related to support for alternative 2, or more directly support for or opposition to increasing fares for walk-on passengers and bicycle riders. The great majority of those comments were related to alternative 2 or the opposition to increasing fares or walk-on passengers and bicycle riders, with some of those comments also referencing the other topics as well. But the great majority of the feedback we received was around those alternative 2 related topics, really. With that, I will pass this off to Ray again, just to walk through those next steps that he had from the remaining on the timeline that he shared with you earlier in the presentation.
Thank you very much, Carl. Next steps subsequent to this hearing, if there are any changes to the proposed fares, we would need to work in fairly short order to get that changed with the order typing service and the code revisor, because we will need to file the final fare proposal with the CR 103 no later than August 30th for an October 1st implementation. We would also immediately begin the notification of the modified fares to our ORCA transit partners. Internally, we would engage in reprogramming our fares to become effective on new fares effective on October 1st, and then distribution of new fares to public and WSF staff, both electronically and on paper.
Thank you, Ray. So to recap, and we can put it for discussion at this point if there's any questions from commissioners, or we will shift to public comment. But a recap of the proposed fare proposal and policy change. So the fare proposal, again, is alternative 1, with a passenger and vehicle fares both increasing 2.5% on October 1st, 2021 and October 1st, 2022. And then the proposed policy change will be for changing the van pool rideshare vehicles occupancy requirements from 5 to 3 people to align with the updated state van pool definition. With that, if Chair, put it to you for how you want to manage it, but open to any questions or further any questions from commissioners or clarifications that you may want to seek.
Any commissioners have questions? Seeing none. Debbie.
Hi, sorry, my video is a little slow on the uptake. Ray, could you just remind us the background for why we're changing the van pool occupancy requirements from 5 to 3, or Carl?
Yes, I can do that. It's in response to the Washington State Legislature in the 2021 session modified the definition of a van pool to be kind of a minimum of 3 people instead of 5, and our fares had been based on collecting from a minimum of 5 people in the van, and even if perhaps some people were not there due to vacations or other, the driver's fare was covered kind of in an annual permit, but we would require 4 additional passenger fares at a minimum. This changes because of the change in definition from 5 to 3. We changed that minimum passenger fare submission to 2 rather than 4. And then the driver, of course, is still covered by the annual permit. But it was strictly in response to legislative change. So
essentially to not be in conflict with state legislative action. Okay, thank you.
That's right.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Hester. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So I'm sorry if I missed this. Can you talk about kind of the extent of comments that were in support of alternative 2? I'm trying to understand kind of how to weigh those first set of outreach results and then what happened next, and how the staff and subcommittee are thinking about that.
Sure, I can. The comments we received following our submittal of alternative 1 as the Commission's proposed option were almost entirely about 120 comments total, and about 115 of them were related to either support for alternative 2 or opposition to increasing bicycle and passenger walk-on fares, or doing so at the same level as vehicle fares. So effectively, support for, if they were to choose, support for alternative 2 is instead of 1. That's in contrast to what we saw in the public forum, where there was greater support for the alternative 1, recognizing there was about 80% of those respondents were self-identified as vehicle drivers, But that said, that was speaking to those results, as well as there was the fact commentary that we heard in June, which was also supportive of alternative one at this time. So at least from those who were commenting. Does that help? Or we can go back to that slide on the public forum. There's some, I think some total numbers in terms of how many people we heard from in that forum.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need super specific numbers. I'm just wondering how either staff, the Ferry subcommittee, are kind of weighing those two different sets of responses. Sure. I think the feedback we got following the comments, I mean, there are each individual people responding, so that's great. There seemed to be a coordinated effort, which is not a bad thing, but it does, I think it does speak to perhaps there was a coordinated effort to put forward comments. So it's valuable in that those people were willing to make comments and put that forward. Does it represent a broad swath of public comment? You know, that's I think take that perhaps with a little grain of salt in terms of how broad of a perspective that's providing, but they certainly were vocal and took the time to provide us comments, and does balance out some of the overall commentary from a forum that was primarily vehicle drivers. So right now it's important to keep in mind that with passenger use significantly down, the great majority of drivers on the ferry, users of the ferry boats are vehicle passengers at this time, especially more relative than usual. So not sure how that plays out with the forum, but it's part of the kind of the balance I think we're looking at right now.
Does that take care of you, Hester?
Yeah, still curious what the subcommittee is thinking, but I'll let the thing proceed. Thanks.
Okay. So before I go to Rima, I've been told that Amy from the Washington State Department of Transportation is on, and we need to introduce her. So Amy, would you like to introduce yourself, and if you have anything to say?
Well, good morning, commissioners. Thank you, Roy. Amy Scarton, deputy at WashDOT. This was a great presentation, Ray. As always, we really appreciate the collaborative work between WSF and the commission. I think we have a great relationship. We've really, we have a great process for fair proposals. We engage in continuous improvement, so it gets better each time we do it. I have no specific comment on the proposal. I just think we followed a really good process, and I'm anxious to hear what the commissioners think. So thanks.
Rima?
Yeah, I guess this question is to Ray with a little bit of a statement regarding the proposal that the commission has put forward of a flat 2.5% for vehicles and passengers. We did get a fair number of comments via email after the June meeting with some concern around that proposal being interpreted as the commission maybe not being as sensitive to advancing multimodal travel. Maybe it could be a hindrance having this increase, an equal increase being applied to passengers. And we have responded to those and want to be clear that the commission for years has been working with Washington State Ferries to create and expand that spread between passenger fares and vehicle fares. And it's something I think is a priority of the commission to continue to incentivize non-vehicular travel. But having said that, this year's was a unique proposal in that we're in the middle of a pandemic and a recovery, and we're clearly seeing a lot more predictability and growth in the vehicular side of travel. And with many folks probably likely to continue teleworking, the commission had voiced its interest in doing things a little different this time, given these kind of unique circumstances. But Ray, I was kind of hoping if you could touch briefly on just a little bit of the history or this of this effort to increase the spread consciously, and that we haven't abandoned that policy. But just kind of want to get some context on that, given some of the comments we got.
Yes, I'll be glad to. And and won't get too deep into history, as you know I love to do. And this dates back actually to our 2000, the Ferry Finance Study work in the 2007-2008 period, and the subsequent long-range plan of 2009, where we essentially took a direction in our long-range planning and thinking to how best to manage our system's capacity, because we knew that we would not have enough vehicle deck space for the amount of traffic that we were projecting. So that was kind of identified in the 2009 long-range plan that said, hey, we should over time gradually spread the fares between passengers and vehicles to give people more of a financial incentive to carpool or to walk on. And I believe we started that in either the 2011 or possibly as late as the 2013 fare cycle, where for each fare cycle from that time up through 2019, we did make incremental small improvements in that. We gradually raised passengers at a slightly lower rate than vehicles, and that was that did make a difference in the long term. We did an analysis, I believe it was even back as far as 2017, which said, hey, we're looking at our passenger ridership is growing maybe slightly faster than vehicles. There might have been other factors involved with that as well, but it is something we've worked together on, and clearly this is this year is very abnormal. You have people who may be forced to drive on rather than the walk on due to other concerns. So I would view this as maybe a one-time kind of reversion back to equal fares for across the board.
All right, any other questions? Okay, and with that, excuse me, before we move on, I would like to take a moment to register and recognize the many years of service by Mr. Deerdorf, who is retiring this month. Ray, you have been a long-time valued resource to the commission, and you have been central and key to all the commission's work and actions on the ferry fares and policies over your career. And as I understand it, your service started with the department on October 1987, 34 years ago. I can't even remember what I was doing back then. Being on the ferry subcommittee, I know for a fact that your retirement will leave a big void with all of us. So on behalf of the commission, I want to wish you the best in your retirement. But I hope that you will take our occasional call when we need to tap into your irreplaceable knowledge on Washington State ferry history.
Thank you very much. I'm really touched by that. That's really wonderful to hear. I'm very moved. I've had a relationship with the commission that goes way back when the commission was actually our board of directors. And that's why I still put on a suit and tie whenever I address you, even if I'm in my own home. So the remarks are greatly appreciated, and I've really enjoyed working with some wonderful commissioners over the years. and back in the 90s with Aubrey Davis and Alice Teresi and Connie Naiva, and later on Dick Ford. It's been a pleasure. So, and also one more thing, Roy. I'm actually leaving at the end of September, not the end of this month. So you've got another month of me. So, and of course I'll make myself available for questions.
Good.
So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And with that, we'll now move on to public comment. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. As I stated earlier, if you've already signed up via the commission's webpage, we will be calling on you next. When you hear your name called, your screen will go blank for a few seconds while we move you over to being a participant. Please turn your video and mic on to testify. At the start of your testimony, please indicate your position, pro or con or otherwise, and the city you reside in. When you are done testifying, we will transfer you back to being an attendee, at which time your screen will go blank again for a few seconds. Once we finish taking testimony from those pre-signed up, we will shift to taking testimony from those who have signed up during this hearing using the question and answer box function. And with that, Tamara, can you start us by calling the first name on your list?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have 4 members of the public who have registered to testify. However, at this time, only one of them is with us. So we will start with Mr. Joe Kunsler.
Good
Morning,
morning.
Joe.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, let me change my background. Okay. Joe Kunsler here. I'm going to be as brief as I can today. I'm sorry to report I cannot support this fare increase. I'm very disappointed that there's no low-income fare implemented in between, and that was what was talked about the last time we had this conversation 2 years ago. And that was why I was so supportive 2 years ago of a fare increase, was that and to help pay for more ferries. Neither of which is realistically moving forward. So I feel the best thing to do is to vote no on this, send this back to the legislature and tell the legislature to do their jobs and fund their ferries. When it comes to public transport, when it comes to funding transportation, we should fund their ferries first, because there is realistically no private sector competition that can step in. This is a publicly owned system that needs to be properly funded. I know former Assistant Secretary Scarton, who's on this call, worked very hard on this and sadly had to step away due to family. And I appreciate her continuing to serve as Assistant Secretary Washdod from home. I also appreciate Ray Dordorf's many years of service to the state ferries, and appreciate my many conversations with him over the past few years very much. I think our state ferry system has some very capable professionals like them, and we're very lucky to have them. But I feel very strongly we need to pressure the state legislature to step up and support the staff and support the ferry riders and fund the ferry system properly. I don't think this fare increase is going to make that much of a difference who decides to travel and who doesn't. It's the importance of getting a low-income fare. And as the great Lindsey Boylan would say, the hero who toppled Andrew Cuomo and who helped topple Donald Trump would say, we need to center those closest to the pain. That's the low-income folks who might have difficulties taking their families on a ferry to a bus to enjoy our state parks or see family on the islands. We need to center those people closest to the pain and not just go through the motions just because. I end my comments with that. Fine. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Joe. Can you state what city you reside in?
Sure. I reside in Skagit County.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, at this time, we have no one else who has indicated live in the meeting that they would like to testify. And the 3 other members of the public who had registered in advance are not with us.
Okay, so then we'll pause for a moment. For anybody who would like to testify, to go to the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen and enter their name and request to testify. We'll give it about a minute.
So Ms. Sarah Kunsler would like to testify.
Okay, let's go ahead and call her up then.
She's been given permission to speak.
Sarah, are you on?
Sarah, you're muted. If you would take your microphone off mute.
Sarah, are you there?
So Sarah, I can see that you're submitting some questions and answers. We will try again to move you. Bobby, can you please try again? Ms. Kunsler's on the call twice, so we might need to promote both of them.
I've promoted her and asked her to unmute.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yes, I'm Sarah Kunsler. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome. Please state whether you're for, against, or other, and your city you reside in.
Yes, I'm Sarah Kunsler from Tacoma, and I just wanted to speak in favor of alternative 2. I believe if our state is going to meet our climate goals, it's really important to allow to ensure that fares are equitable for people biking and walking onto the ferry, and that we're raising rates more for people driving as opposed to people biking and walking, in order to ensure that we incentivize transportation that is cleaner and safer for our region, as transportation is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gases in our region. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Tamara, is there anybody else?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair, but if you could give me one moment, let me do another check of the
Sure.
Online. Mr. Chair, we have heard from everybody who has signed up and or is with us.
Okay, seeing that there's no further people signed up to testify, this will conclude our public testimony portion of the hearing. I want to thank everyone who submitted written comments and those who testified here today. And with that, we'll move on to commission discussion and action. Commissioners, please turn on your cameras for our discussion and action. As a reminder, we'll be taking 2 votes today. They'll both be roll call votes, which will be identified on the slides in a moment. The 2 items are the fare increase and the policy change regarding van pools. And with that, Debbie, you have a comment?
Yes, I sit on the Ferry subcommittee and am a ferry writer. So I've thought about this particular agenda item before us quite a bit. And I continue to support alternative 1, in spite of reading all of the interest in the bike and walk on folks not having a fare increase this year. I think we're facing a really unusual year where a lot of walk-on people, potential passengers, are responding to much more powerful incentives than we can provide with price. They're responding to the need to work from home. They're responding to fear of taking transit. They're responding to lack of transit. And it's also a year where everyone has suffered economic hardship. So I think it's an exceptional year and a time not to place more of the financial burden on the drive-on sector of our ridership, which is coming back slowly, but a little bit more rapidly than the walk-on ridership. And I also think we have to remember that the opportunity to walk on is very unequal across the system. We have a couple of routes where there's fairly robust transit service on both ends, or the route lands in an urban area where it's possible to walk to your destinations. And then we have a lot of routes where it really isn't an option for people. There's inadequate parking, there's no bus service, and they really don't have a choice. And as Mr. Kunsler reminded us, we don't have a low income fare in place. So I think that's another important thing to remember. And then we already have some incentives to walking on, and that is the very high price of driving your car on. So that's a pretty potent incentive, I think, already. And the fact that we're creating this, adding a percentage increase, does mean the real dollars for the drivers are increasing faster than they are for the walk-ons. So we are creating something of a gap just by virtue of a percent across the board increase. Well, I know we do need to incentivize passengers. I think there's some other things we should try to work on, and those are the availability and cost of parking and better transit service. The route that I'm a regular rider on, it's actually more costly to park your car for a few days than it is to drive it on. And if you're 2 hours late for your parking, you get a $55 penalty fee. And given that our ferries are often late, that's a pretty potent disincentive too. So I think it's a complicated environment and an unusual year. And for that reason, I'm continuing to support alternative 1, where we're sort of spreading that burden evenly. And I agree with Mr. Kunsler. I'm very sorry that we haven't been able to find reliable capital funding, and we need to go ahead with a rate increase. So there are my comments, and I'm happy to hear what other commissioners have to say and engage in any discussion.
Okay, Hester?
No comment, thanks.
There you go.
I just said I don't have any further comments. Thank you.
Shiv?
Yes, I also sit on the Ferry subcommittee with Commissioner Young, and she's a user of the facilities. She lives on it on the island. I am not, but it's unfortunate that we have to increase the fare. I do agree with her, alternative 1. We have to meet our obligation. That's the reason we are trying to work on what's the best way to meet the obligation and maintain the equity among transportation vehicles versus passengers. And I almost wholeheartedly agree with Commissioner Young's comment on that particular issue. Thank you.
Jerry?
Yeah, I agree with what Debbie has said. Also, it's been a very difficult time, and I really want to thank the Ferry subcommittee on working through this difficult decision and working with the faculty members as well. So I have no further comments. I just think Debbie stated very well what we've gone through as far as setting this fair.
Kelly?
Oh, I agree with many of the comments of my fellow commissioners, and I also do hear and share some of the concerns brought up by comments that were submitted, both, in support of alternative 1 as well as alternative 2. I think there's a general want, obviously, to meet all of the priorities that we have as a state with regards to climate, with regards to equity, with regards to access to transportation, and all those are difficult things to balance. And of course, in the midst of a pandemic, when everything has been upended, becomes even more challenging as well. So I also continue to have support of alternative 1, though I do look forward to furthering the conversation, particularly around the low income piece, which Mr. Kunsler brought up today for us, but it's something we're looking at on the tolling facilities, and I think it's something that will translate over into our work here on the ferry systems as well. I'd also like to learn a little bit more, as this is my first year on the commission, digging into some of the data of our ridership and understanding, we don't have all of the data points to understand, of those that are driving, how many of those are low income versus walk on, how are they using the system? I think there's a lot of information that we need to glean still. And the FACT continues to be a great source of data for us, as we saw with the great turnout and comments that were shared during that process. So I just want to thank everyone who serves on the subcommittee. This is a lot of work. I know there's a lot of scenarios that were run and discussed. I also thank all of our writers who have contributed comments and participate in the FACT. It is important information for us to see. And I look forward to digging into more information, and especially as we move forward, trying to achieve all of these priorities that we have and balancing them. I think there'll be some interesting discussions and some interesting fair setting conversations to be had as we go forward. So again, I thank everyone for their commitment and conversation in this important topic.
And Jim, I hopefully will not forget you in the future. So you're next.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I would have to echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I am concerned that we're stuck in this position. It's almost like a rock between a hard place, unfortunately. And I do believe that we need to go back to the legislature and make sure that we fully fund our ferry system properly. As the secretary likes to say, we fund our system, as one whole system. And so we need to think of it that way. I too agree that we need to do more work on low income tolling study, as well as look at this as how it would translate to ferry fares also. As my colleagues, I'm supportive of option 1 right now, because to be honest with you, I don't see option 2 as being a fairer solution, if you will. So that's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate comments. I appreciate the FACT, as well as the subcommittee's work. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, any other discussion? I can entertain a motion if anybody would like to make one.
I would move that we advance alternative 1 for the CR 103.
I second.
There's a motion and second. Any more discussion? Seeing none. Tamara, can you call the roll?
Chair Jennings,
Aye.
Vice Chair Young,
Aye.
Commissioner Litt,
Aye.
Commissioner Batra,
Aye.
Commissioner Sarabrin,
Aye.
Commissioner Restucci,
Aye.
Commissioner Fukai.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, there are 7 yeas, no nays.
Motion carries. We will file the 103. And that,
I-
with that, we have one more vote to take, correct? Any
Right, and-
discussion on that vote?
I move that we change the definition of van pool as defined in the WSF proposal to be 3 people rather than 5.
Second, this is Commissioner Restucci.
There's a motion and second. Any more discussion? The pause is because I got to change my screen to find everybody. Seeing none, Tamara, can you call the roll?
Chair Jennings,
Aye.
Vice Chair Young,
Aye.
Commissioner Litt,
Aye.
Commissioner Batra,
Aye.
Commissioner Sarabrin,
Aye.
Commissioner Restucci,
Aye.
Commissioner Fukai.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, there are 7 yeas, no nays.
Motion carries. Again, we'll file, make sure the 103 is filed. Any other discussion for today? Hearing none. Our next meeting will be our final virtual hearing on the toll rating proposal for SR 99 tunnel, SR 520 bridge, and the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. It will be held on Tuesday, August 24th at 10 a.m. For more information on the briefing or the hearing, you can go to the commission's website and include, there is an online sign up for those wishing to testify and to register a link which is needed to attend. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Bye,
Thank you.
Ray.
Bye, Ray.
Bye, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Bye.
Thanks very much for the kind remarks. I really appreciate it.
You deserve
Enough.
them.
Earned it.
I've known you since I was an AWC board member, Ray. I really appreciate everything you've done for.
All right. Well, thanks very much.
You'll be missed.
Mhm. Indeed.